Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I am thrilled today. I have, I can't even find the right phrase. I want to say paranormal royalty, but that sounds creepy. It's like when you go to the Comedy Magic Club and someone says, can you bring up Ray Romano? And you can't do the intro because there's no intro good enough. Joshua P. Warren is with me today. Joshua, you have been a part of the paranormal field forever, haven't you?
It kind of feels that way. It's been over 25 years, and I just want to say right up front here, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast, because you have a lot of wonderful credentials, but, I think I told you off air that I believe you're the first person I've ever talked to who actually performed stand-up on David Letterman's show, and it was actually hilarious. So this is a treat for me because I'm a big stand-up fan. So thank you for having me.
Oh, great. You know, I perform at a lot of conventions, and I'm waiting for the day. Hopefully we're going to bump in person. We'll get to have some laughs there. And, but yeah, just thrilled to have you. It's funny. One of my first things I did in the paranormal, when I got started, was I got your film, which was called A Night in a Haunted House, I believe.
Yeah.
It was great. It was so helpful. And I got lost in your website today. You do a daily podcast.
Yeah, I just started that last year in October. And, I've been hosting radio for about 15 years, but I was hosting FCC regulated radio, Clear Channel, and then of course it transitioned into iHeart. And I love the fact that with my new daily podcast, not only is it unregulated and completely independent, but it can be as short as I want or as long as I want. I don't take sponsors. I literally say I do not want sponsors. I do not want advertising. And I just am able to, at least every day or two, I call it Joshua P. Warren Daily. But, even if I can't do it every single day, I try to do it as often as I can. And I find enormous enjoyment in being free to literally talk about whatever I want, however I want, and nobody can fire me. Think about that. Nobody can fire me. So that's pretty nice.
I know. I'm pretty lucky. I have 2 jobs and no bosses. So I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, I always felt like the internet was the great equalizer when it came to the field of entertainment.
Well, yes. And we are very lucky that we live in this day and age when we all have access to literally free information. And so you can pick and choose what you want. And that's especially important when it comes to this bizarro field called the paranormal, because we're talking about the fringe stuff, things that don't necessarily neatly fit into one category or another. And so it's nice to be able to reach other people who understand that, as opposed to trying to appeal to some demographic or something.
Yes. And and I'm just going to tell everybody, you want to go to the website, joshuapwarren.com, because first of all, whatever you're interested in, it's there. You have been in this field, topics for everything. You have you have books for sale. You have everything. And tell me a little bit, or tell my listeners a little bit about the Curiosity Shop.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because, that is one of the reasons that I'm able to operate freely, is that I like to produce experiments, and those experiments often produce products. And so I have this little thing called the Curiosity Shop at joshuapwarren.com. And I like to present products that are completely unique. I mean, this is not stuff you're going to find at Walmart. This is not stuff you're going to buy anywhere else. These are experimental products that come from primarily my own research and other researchers that I trust. And if you're looking for something truly unique on a very limited basis, you'll find it in my curiosity shop.
Yeah, and and you go everywhere. This is not just talk. You're in Sedona. I saw you were talking about the wand from Sedona. Do you know what I was? Here, I'm finding it right here. The Aura wand, the Vortex wand. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, I have been really interested my whole life in this idea of manifestation because, a lot of people, they look at the work that I've done, and I've been very fortunate. I've written and published over 20 books, some with big publishers like Simon and Schuster. And a lot of people look at me and they say, well, this is a ghost guy or a UFO guy. But what I've really been doing is investigating the relationship between matter and energy, and how something can transition from physical to non-physical and vice versa. And I found over the years that you can explore this in a laboratory trying to create a ghost or some kind of other strange phenomenon, or you can just look at techniques that go back thousands of years regarding how to take your mind, your consciousness, the most mysterious thing in the universe, and manifest things that are not necessarily spooky, whether it's, success or more money or a better relationship. I mean, all this kind of stuff you hear about in infomercials, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, you can actually apply it to positive things as well as spooky things. And so that's what I'm interested in, is how that things transition between physical and non-physical.
And that's why when I emailed you, there were two topics that I totally wanted to cover with you, because I heard you on a couple of radio shows talk about these two things. The second topic, I have an obsession with mirrors, and I actually own a haunted mirror. But the first topic that I had never heard of before was sigils, SIGIL. Can you tell us all what sigils are and how you use them? I see them here on your website. It's very interesting.
Well, sure. A sigil is a symbol that represents an energy field. And I think the best way to describe it is to take a piece of sheet music, for example. You take this piece of paper that has a bunch of lines and dots on it, and it just looks like an interesting image to the untrained eye. But if you know how to take those dots and interpret them, well, then suddenly we have music, and that music creates an emotion, and that emotion brings up ideas. And so what you see is there's a relationship between images and vibration and energy fields. And so if you look back thousands of years, there are all these interesting symbols that have been traditionally called magical or religious or philosophical or whatever. And these symbols do represent some kind of energy that is in some cases lost, but in other cases we're trying to find it. And so the idea is that an energy was created that was transformed into this symbol. And when you come into contact with that symbol, then you're also coming into contact with that energy field. And so I'm exploring this, and I've created a whole new field of research called paracymatics, in which I'm able to take messages, tones, and turn them into symbols. And I'm right now working on Paracymatics 2.0, which is a brand new thing. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you, Karen, this is the first time I have had the opportunity to talk about it, period.
Nice.
Where I am taking, you got some breaking inside news here, where I'm taking images like crop circles or maybe something like hieroglyphics, etc., and I am turning them into tones. So it goes both ways. I'm taking tones and turning them into to symbols, and then I'm taking symbols and turning them into tones. And what I find is that when people come into contact with these, whether it's a sigil or it's a tone, they are somehow transformed and transported into the original energy field.
Now I'm looking at the sigils on your website, and they are so you have the black and light, and then is that the energy? You have the energetic photo next to it. Is that what that is?
Yeah, well, like on my website at joshuapwarren.com, for example, if you scroll down on the homepage, you'll find a handful of these sigils. And if you click a link there, it will take you to an even larger selection of these. And basically, this work that I'm doing right now is based upon work that's been done for hundreds of years. It really started in the late 1700s with a scientist and musician named Chladni. And he would take these thin pieces of metal and sprinkle something like salt or sand on top of them. And then he would draw a violin bow down the side. And when that tone resonated through the metal, you would see the sand or whatever particles sort of snap into these beautiful, almost snowflake-like patterns. And you can do this nowadays very easily by taking an audio speaker and putting it underneath a thin piece of metal that has, again, salt or sand on it. And you can see all these patterns sort of emerge when you play different tones. And it's not just a two-dimensional thing. I mean, if you put it underneath something that's three-dimensional, like, let's say, a semi-liquid substance like cornstarch and water, you'll see that this is also a three-dimensional phenomenon where these ridges sort of rise up and writhe around. And so I was very interested in the fact that vibration and tone could create a physical form. It's almost like that you have a non-physical mold into which these physical particles adhere and shape themselves. And you could almost say that this is what holds the entire universe together, and that all the things that we see when we look out there with our best telescopes and we see stars and planets and galaxies and so on are the product of vibrational patterns that hold the physical matter in a particular shape.
Yeah.
And so with my research, I thought, well, what if I started inserting messages into this? And so this is where it transforms into paracymatics, which is where I put messages into the process of creating these things, and then I scan them with lasers, with infrared light, ultraviolet light, and I get an image from that and turn that into a sigil. And what I find is that the message that I put into the vibration that creates the sigil seems to help someone relate and connect with that, whether it is a sigil for having more paranormal phenomena, more vivid dreams, attracting money, so on and so forth.
Fascinating, because that's what I'm looking at now. So, and I'm thinking you did it quite a few times. Did you get the same image every time?
No, this is where it becomes sort of a science and an art. And that's because when you are looking at anything that relates to imagery, perspective is the key. And this has been a big challenge for me. Like, for example, right now, I'm working on, again, Paracymatics 2.0. So I'm taking something like Stonehenge, and I'm trying to figure out how to capture Stonehenge as a tone. Well, the first issue is, how do you look at Stonehenge? Do you look at it from the perspective of somebody standing there on the ground, or do you look at it overhead from the perspective of someone looking down? And so you have to make a choice right off the bat as to what point of view that you're going to use. And so it begins with something subjective, and then you take whatever your subjective viewpoint is, and you finally use that as your reference point to create the tone. So this tells us a lot, however, about the reality of research in general. And what I mean by that is you have a lot of people out there, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, Karen. There are a lot of people who say, "Oh, well, this is scientific." Well, how do we determine something scientific? Well, we use tools, we use instruments. Well, those instruments were envisioned by a human, created by a human, constructed by a human, calibrated by a human, used by a human, interpreted by a human. And so ultimately, we kind of fool ourselves into thinking there exists this thing that is called objectivity, when really everything boils down to something subjective. And that becomes especially clear when you're dealing with paracymatics.
That's why I find what you do in the stuff on your site very interesting, because, and I don't know if it's because the paranormal community was sort of made fun of for so long, but people rarely take that next step to say, let's try this now. You know what I mean? Like, you always have to go the next step and say, let's try this. Let's move forward. Let's give it a shot, because they always want to rely on someone else's research, but you're always out there trying to do something new or go the next step. And that's why I love listening to you.
Well, thank you for saying that. And, I'm in a position, going back to what I was saying earlier, where I can do whatever I want to, because you have so many people in positions of credibility who have gone to these big schools and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get their education, and then they finally get into a job at a university where they're working for tenure, and they don't want to jeopardize that. And what's funny is that you would not believe how many people I talk to on a weekly basis who are in very esteemed positions at various universities around the world, who are just as fascinated with the stuff that I'm dealing with as you are, but they can't talk about it because they can't take that risk. And I happen to be in a position where I can take that risk. I can talk about it, and I can, I'm not saying that I'm right in every case, but what I'm saying is I'm able to bring up these questions without fearing repercussions. And so I have this enormous amount of freedom, and that is why that you find that sometimes things that are paranormal, they kind of gradually transition into something that's normal.
Right.
And once it becomes normal, then it's like, oh, okay, well, now it's normal. We'll take it from here. And they kind of forget the quote unquote paranormal people who were ahead of the curve. But I take that challenge. It's a blessing and a curse. And so we have to be on that cutting edge and willing to talk about things that the credible scientists can't, because we're willing to take that risk, and we're happy to go on the record.
Yeah, it's funny because I did comedy on the road for about 25 years, and I was out like 35 weeks a year, and I decided, I said, that's too much. So I opened a business reading tarot cards, which I had always done, and now it's kind of good. I ended up with 2 full-time jobs instead of 1, but I had some Christmas parties this year, and it always amazes me. You cannot guess who is, when you say paranormal or tarot, it will always amaze me. You cannot pick which person is going to be the skeptic and which person is going to be the one that hangs on your every word. I just did a party, and it was sort of a it's a business I can't name that has several CEOs, and they were hanging on my every word. And I was thinking, you guys, 6 figures is too little for you guys, and you're listening to everything I say. And this one guy was a CEO of a firearms company. And I looked at how he was looking at me and I thought, oh my God, this is how the Winchester house got started. I could start my own crazy mansion. But it really is amazing who you can never guess who's going to be the one that's on board or who's not. But I do always find that you are always out there on the edge. So that's fascinating.
Well, I feel like that is the whole essence of research. I mean, what's funny about the exploration, about science, is that, if we knew everything, well, the scientific process would come to an end. And if you talk right now to the most brilliant cosmologist and astrophysicist who have the biggest budgets, the best technology, and the ability to look out there into the universe and examine everything as deeply and as far and as wide as possible, they will tell you that over 95% of what we are able to observe is either called dark matter or dark energy, which means that we have no idea what it is. It's defined by the very fact that we don't know what it is. And I think it's interesting if I were to hand you a cup and say, this cup is full of liquid, drink this, Karen. And you say, well, what's inside of it? And I say, well, 5% of it's apple juice. And you said, well, what's the other 95%? I said, I don't know. Just would you drink that? No. You would say, I don't know what's in this cup. And so we have these folks who are in the positions of research and data collection who are telling us we can't explain what at least 95% of this is, and we ought to just be honest enough to say, look, if we don't know what 95% of all this is, we just don't know what it is. We don't know what's going on here. And so we have to be pretty arrogant and pretty egocentric to pretend that we do.
Yeah, that's also, I've the junk DNA, when they talk about our DNA and they talk about the junk DNA that we just don't know what that is, that I feel like that's kind of the same thing. Like I'm like, what is your feeling on that we are sort of a combination of aliens or humans? Like, I think that's what our junk DNA is. What is your theory on that?
Well, I if I'm not mistaken, I think the best geneticists out there say that there is something like a 5% difference between us and a chimpanzee. So if you see a chimpanzee sitting out there in the jungle, scratching his butt or whatever, and then all of a sudden a helicopter comes down and a fella gets out wearing a nice Italian suit on his cell phone, and I say, how much of a difference do you think there is between that chimpanzee and this guy? About 5%. Does that sound right? No.
No, I think I dated the chimpanzee, though.
I think that it's sort of common sense tells us that there is something wrong about the way we view genes and DNA. If you're going to tell me that there's only a 5% difference between a chimpanzee and a human, and you look at the constructs that we have created all over the world. So yeah, I think it's going to be one of those things where in 100 years, maybe less, somebody is going to look back and say, those stupid scientists used to believe that. It kind of reminds me of like in the 1950s, you'd see doctors, bona fide medical doctors on TV commercials smoking cigarettes,
right,
saying, oh, yeah, this is the best cigarette for you. We're going to look back and see that, no, we had some serious flaws in how we were using DNA to define the difference among species. And so, yes, obviously, humans are so different from everything else on this planet that I am completely open to the idea that there has been some kind of alien influence here, some genetic manipulation. And I think most people sort of intuitively understand that is the most likely explanation for why we're so different.
Yes, and I feel like science kind of folded a little bit. It almost, the article I read where they were saying like the octopus, they can't kind of figure out where that came from because it's not really connected to anything. And the article was kind of like, all right, we're going to say it. We don't know where this, octopus DNA came from. And now I have a fascination with octopuses. And I think I dated one of those too. So, and I knew I could talk to you about anything. And so I'm going to bring you back to sigils because so these that I see on your website, and I want to ask you about a symbol, which I don't believe is a sigil, but when people see these, I know this is like kind of a weird question or a leap to make, but sigils are neither negative nor positive. They are just like a vibration, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Sure.
So people can use it, because when I heard you also on the radio, you were talking a little bit about tattoos also on this topic. Do I have that right, that there's a connection that even a tattoo through time can sort of become a sigil?
Oh, yeah. All tattoos are sigils. I mean, for one thing, I'll let everybody know, I don't have any tattoos. I come from a family that has no tattoos. My mom, dad, sister, none of us have tattoos. My wife doesn't have a tattoo. And the main reason that I don't have a tattoo is that I believe very strongly that when you get something tattooed onto your body, that it changes your energy field in both a physical and a mental, psychological way. And so, there's no doubt about it. I mean, when you take that step to put something permanent there, it's going to keep you, to some degree, trapped into that design. And the reason I don't have a tattoo is because, gosh, I'm always growing and changing, and I don't want to feel trapped. But if you get a tattoo of some kind, it is going to stick with you and determine something about your life forever.
Wow, that's they should tell young kids that. I have a tattoo, well, especially young kids, that I have a tattoo, but my tattoo is a note to Archangel Michael, so I think I'm good with that. Throughout time for protection. But I find that fascinating, and it's another one of those things where we don't realize how much power we have over our own lives and our own beings. And if people wanted to use sigils, how is it just gazing at them, or how would they use them?
Yeah, the most basic way is to simply take 30 seconds every day and look at a sigil. So you can take any of these symbols and you can put them somewhere that is noticeable to you. One of the best places is to just put one right on your bathroom mirror. And you'll be surprised, because you'll notice it the first few days and then you'll stop noticing it. And so after a few days, it's kind of good to switch it around into different places so that you notice it again. How often do you look at your phone? I mean, everybody these days seems to wake up and the first thing they do before they even go to the bathroom is look at their phone. And the last thing they look at before they go to sleep is their phone. And so you can use the background or the wallpaper of your phone, and put a sigil there. But by simply looking at it, it's almost like an abstract language that transcends human languages. It goes to the heart of the psyche, because we're talking about something that is rooted in Mother Nature. That's why it's so interesting to look at things like the golden ratio or the Fibonacci sequence. I mean, when you look all throughout nature at just spirals, the spiral of the Milky Way galaxy or the spiral of a sea ship or whatever, these are things that transcend the human inventions of language. And so what you find is that the sigils that are most effective are sigils that are representing something about Mother Nature in general that applies to everybody. And that's why, for example, if you go to another country and they give you their currency, it's very easy to spend that currency because it doesn't feel like real money to you. It just feels like some kind of monopoly money, because money is as a form of a sigil, and which is why we have all this weird stuff all over money, including especially the U.S. Currency. And so what you find is that we have a certain way of identifying things on a cultural basis, with language, with coinage and all that. But there are other symbols that go beyond that, and that's what a sigil is there for, to capture something that's common among all humankind.
Wow. And little, I know it's a symbol, it's kind of off conversation, but the dollar sign has the eye with the triangle. That is a third eye, or does that have a different meaning to it?
Well, I think that's one of the miraculous things about that symbol, is that it is open to interpretation, but I think we all realize that what it represents is that there is a collective observer of some kind. And you can call that God, even if you're an atheist, it doesn't matter. You can sort of sense that what we're representing here is that there is something that's observing everything, and that everything is all tied into a unified system. And of course, there are various metaphysicians throughout history who have talked about this in terms of the Akashic record. The idea that there is some library of data out there that everything goes into. And what's really weird is that, going back to modern science, quantum physicists and, again, astrophysicists and cosmologists, they all claim that actually, according to their latest data, all past, present, and future is occurring at once. And that we are simply moving through this process from our particular point of view, because that our tiny little ant brains are only able to process it 1 minute at a time, like a scanner. Moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month. And so the idea here is that there is some kind of greater connection between everything, and that I represents that, and you can personify that and think of it as a big guy sitting in the sky with a white beard, or you can look at it more realistically as something that we're frankly not able to comprehend, but still is viewing the whole big picture and everything that we are immersed within.
Right. And that actually brings me to topic number 2, that is about mirrors. And it's kind of, the first I heard you talk, I own a haunted mirror. Somebody brought me this old mirror. It stands on its own. It looks like it's in a horror movie. And I put it in my apartment, and my dog couldn't sleep. He would not sleep around it. And my best friend is actually an animal communicator. And I said, "What's going on with Courage? Why can't he sleep in front of this?" And she says, "There's a little boy looking at you from the other side of that mirror." And it just happened, I had 2 friends come over that night, and one of them is a psychic and a medium, and she comes into the kitchen and she goes, "I gotta do something with your mirror. There's a little kid looking at you from the other side of that mirror," and I actually had somebody come over and bless the mirror, and then all of a sudden my dog could sleep and everything. But it leaves that fascinating. Now I kind of have that. What's with a mirror? I know you even make that box where all the mirrors point in. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, this is a huge topic and a great topic. I first became very pragmatically aware of the impact of mirrors when I was just a teenager, and I started going around and investigating haunted houses because I was writing articles for the local newspaper. And time again, I would go into a supposedly haunted house, and somebody would say, "That's the haunted room." And I'd walk in, and somewhere in the room, I would find two mirrors facing each other. It got to the point where I would walk into a house and I would say, "Don't tell me what the haunted room is." And I would find, at least two reflective surfaces facing each other. And this became so prevalent that I started becoming very interested in what was happening here. Now, let's think about what a mirror is. A mirror is something that reflects electromagnetic energy. And so when you have two mirrors, again, for example, facing each other, then they are actually reflecting electromagnetic energy at each other. And when you look at a mirror that's facing another mirror, you see a mirror within a mirror within a mirror. It's an infinite image. And so what you're seeing is an infinite tunnel of electromagnetic energy. And so this may create some kind of a portal, shall we say, that makes it easier for non-physical things to slip back and forth between the non-physical world and the physical world. Now, that said, if you go back thousands of years, we have things like scrying, where people gaze into reflective surfaces and are able to see visions and have paranormal experiences. You can update this nowadays with the psychomantium, which is something that my friend Dr. Raymond Moody has done a great job of modernizing based upon what the ancient Greeks were doing, where you sit there and you look in the direction of a mirror, and then paranormal phenomena occurs. And what you have to realize is that your eyes are, we talk about eyes as the gateway to the soul. Well, there's probably a lot of truth to that your eyes are connected to some other database of information. And so when you're looking at a mirror and you are looking into your own eyes, it's very much like two mirrors facing each other. And so it seems that whenever energy is being reflected back upon itself, that it creates this strange opening that allows paranormal phenomena to flow through. It's kind of like when you're on stage and you have the microphone close to the speaker, and all of a sudden you get this terrible squealing called feedback, because you're taking that energy and you're projecting it back upon itself. And it becomes sort of a resonance that accelerates. And so I believe that mirrors, whether they're just facing each other or you're looking into a mirror, they allow some kind of a transition to occur between the physical world and the non-physical world, and you find all kinds of unusual manifestations around that connection.
Wow. I there's a hotel when I work in Utah, and it's, they've had, the stories are crazy. In fact, it's one of the few, I'm pretty much game to go anywhere to go investigating, but this hotel's really very, very dark, and, it just feels too, I don't know, there's a couple of places I won't go. So I went in. I'm now saying that I wouldn't go in. I'm going to tell you how I went in. And they had all these particular stories about the 11th floor, but the lobby also had a lot of hauntings. And I started talking to the woman behind the desk, and I'm thinking, it seems very common here. She's just telling me regular haunting stories, and then she's telling me about how they redid the place. And she said, I haven't had any thing happen to me here. And they just had painted, she tells me, they just had all these mirrors that were facing each other, and they had painted over all of them. And she says, all I can tell you is I liked the lobby much better before they painted over all the mirrors. And I looked up, and sure enough, they had mirror to mirror to mirror, all now covered in paint. And I thought, that must have calmed this down a lot, because as soon as I went up to the second and third floor, it got like a much heavier feeling. But I thought, wow, they didn't even know, or I wonder if they did know, and they pulled somebody in because they changed the hotel, and they'd kind of tried to wipe all the haunting stories off the internet. And I thought, I wonder if somebody came in and told them that's the first thing you do is stop that mirror to mirror right there. But I think it really worked. Fierce, Funny, and Female has won over 10 book awards, and probably while I'm telling you this, it's winning 10 more. As one of the first women to work as a laborer in the Texas oil field, Marty McGibbon set off explosives and staked oil wells before realizing her childhood dream of becoming a successful stand-up comic. Marty introduces readers to a wide range of characters in her life, from sleazy authority figures and crazy Corn Belt cult leaders to Texas oil billionaires to wild-eyed redneck co-workers who robbed banks on their lunch hour. This is the second in Marty's series, and it is one of the most exciting stories. It's the story of a young woman's triumph over adversity and trauma, told with grace, wit, and laugh-out-loud humor. Look for Fierce, Funny, and Female on Amazon.com, author Marty McGibbon. Now, you make a box that's mirror to mirror. What happens there?
Yeah, this is known as the Devil's Toy Box. And basically what you do is take 6 square mirrors, doesn't matter the size, and you glue them all together into a cube with the mirrored side, if there is only one mirrored side of each pane, the mirrored sides always facing inward. And then once you have this cube, you can hook some kind of a microphone to it. For example, there are these microphones, back in the old days that we would use once in a while that would have a suction cup that you'd stick on the back of a phone receiver, and then you could record the conversation. And so if you take some kind of a microphone like that and you stick it to this cube, well, then sometimes you will get these incredible sounds coming from it. And often they sound like, dare I say, demonic growling. And the problem with this is that it's not consistent. It seems to be some kind of an antenna that is very good at picking up what is happening at a certain place. So that's not to say that you're always going to get these sounds from it constantly. But if you take this thing to certain places, you will hear some blood-curdling noises coming from it. And of course, if you get on the internet and you just look up Devil's Toy Box, you can probably hear some of these recordings and see some of the experiments that are being done. But you're talking about basically a space that is in the midst of nothing but reflective surfaces. And I've had a couple of people contact me over the years saying that they were going to build a version of this big enough to stand within, and then then I never hear from them again. So.
Oh, that's interesting. I find there's a lot of elevators, especially in older buildings. They've got the mirrors on all sides of the elevator. So when I was sort of wondering, are mirrors actually kind of portals? So when they come up and they say there's a little boy in that mirror, it doesn't necessarily mean the little boy is stuck in that mirror. Can it just be a portal to another time?
Well, it can. One thing that I think is important to point out is that analyzing photos of mirrors is notoriously difficult, because anytime you have a mirror or a pane of glass or a picture is taken pointed toward a light source, you get all these weird optical effects because of the way a camera lens works. And so you can never really read too much into a photograph of a mirror. But as far as the personal experience goes, yes, there is certainly something about the fact that this is a substance, and there are many different types of ways of constructing a mirror, but this is a substance that's reflecting light, i.e. electromagnetic energy, and that is exactly what your brain is doing when you're looking at it. And so you sort of become a part of the circuit at that point. And so there are many different ways to explain why that you might actually observe something paranormal around the mirror.
Who do tarot readers go for tarot readings? They go to Melissa Sonova at melissasonova.com. She gave me the best reading a couple of months ago that is still resonating and helping me out now. She is authentic and to the point. You loved her on the podcast. She is the No BS tarot reader. She also has a tarot class online right now. Check it out. Just watching the promo, you will see how much fun you are going to have while you learn. Also, check out her book, which is always right beside me when I'm doing my readings or my tarot card for me in the morning. It is called Kitchen Table Tarot, and you will love it. Melissa Sonova, that's MELISSACYNOVA. Check her out. Yeah, and it was very funny, but somebody was talking to me about I think this was a Wiccan, but she was saying something about how when you go in a hotel, you think about how many people, when you're looking in that bathroom mirror, how many people connected to that mirror, and it can get a little bit creepy.
Well, yeah, that's a really good point. When it comes to ghostly phenomena in general, sometimes we have what we often call, imprints or residuals. And here's what it reminds me of. If you take an iron nail, for example, that nail may not be magnetic. So you could hold that nail up to a paper clip and it wouldn't pick it up. But if you take a magnet and you stroke that nail 10 or 20 times in the same direction, well, now it's magnetic and you can pick up that paper clip with it. It becomes polarized. And so it seems like that it's possible there's some property of space-time of this this area that we're walking around within, this three-dimensional volume, that can become polarized. And so sometimes one very strong event can occur that creates that polarization. In other cases, it could be a series of repeated events over time that creates that polarization. But however it happens, you get this sense that this medium that we're within, called space-time, can actually record information, can record data, and that you can therefore, under certain circumstances, walk into an area that has had this kind of energy repeatedly emphasized, and you witness what this signature is, what this data is, what this information is that's been put there. And so that's what, in many cases, a haunting is. A haunting is not necessarily a place where you have some disembodied spirit that's running around. Most of the time, a haunting is a place where either something extreme happened to polarize the environment, or enough people have gone to that spot and thought about a certain thing, which could even be something that's imaginary, by the way. It could even be something fictional. But either way, the human mind polarizes that area to the point where it has this this information stored that you can observe under certain circumstances.
That's I kind of feel like when you were saying there how we can kind of create something with our mind. Sometimes I wonder if that happens, like the Jersey Devil, for example, is something that there was a legend with it, and everybody hears the story, and then everybody kind of thinks about it, and then next thing you know, somebody kind of sees something. And I always wonder if we put so much energy into it that sometimes we create these things ourselves.
Well, we certainly can do that. The Tibetans called this the tulpa effect, Tulpa, and this is something that I've studied extensively because, one of the best examples is the author Walter Gibson, who in the 1920s lived in Greenwich Village and was struggling to make ends meet. And at that time, The Shadow was a very popular radio program. And so to capitalize on this, they hired him to write novels about this character, the Shadow. And he was so prolific that he would sometimes crank out one or two full length novels per month. And he did this for years. He would just sit there and do nothing but obsessively write these novels. And then after he moved from the house, for years afterward, people who lived in that house claimed that it was haunted by his fictional characters. They would see the Shadow whipping around a corner or some villain dashing across the hallway. And this is actually quite common throughout paranormal history, that sometimes even something that is imagined takes on a life of its own, because it's sort of imprinted in the same manner within that space-time volume. And so what we have to ultimately consider is that we have to sometimes discern the difference between something that might be here from another realm, another dimension, versus things that we humans have imprinted upon our own realm. And I have done many experiments over the years where I've been able to create tulpas, sometimes organically by getting people together who are all focusing on the same thing, and sometimes using technology, hooking brainwave monitors up to people who are focusing on something and then broadcasting it through a Tesla coil and literally manipulating the electromagnetic environment. I've done this in many different ways over the years, and you can read some of those reports on my website. But I have no doubt that we can create these things. And so if I were to, for example, purchase 100 acres and go through that land with a fine-tooth comb and tell you for certain, I know every little beast and creature that lives there. If I turn around and tell everybody there's a Bigfoot here, well, 10 years later, people are going to be seeing Bigfoot left and right, because they will start projecting that onto that land.
You know, I picture a cocktail party at your house. There's a guy with the straps to his head being virgin, and there's a tulpa over there, and it must be the most exciting thing to see. You know, I knew I could talk to you forever, but I know you have a life. I want to ask you this question. I had an experience. We went to, I don't know if you've ever been to the Shanghai tunnels in Portland. I can't believe you haven't. Have you ever gone there?
You know what? It's odd that you bring that up, because I am actually traveling to Oregon and Washington State very soon, but I have not been there. No.
Oh, you know what? There's you want to talk to Michael P. Jones, or I played the comedy club is right above, Comedy Club Harvey is right above the tunnels. And it's just so fascinating. And one of the things that, it was through mediums and stuff. They said there was one spirit that was holding the other spirits there. And it may have been somebody from that time who they describe what the guy looks like. And he sort of, kept the people that were shanghaied. I guess the story was that he kept them chained to the wall, and he was sort of in charge of watching them. And now in the afterlife, that is supposedly what is still going on. And a friend and I were talking about it, and he called that guy a soul collector, that he was collecting souls that he would get his badge to move on or something. I know we're getting very dark here, but I wondered, have you ever heard that term, soul collector, or did we make it up?
Well, I've heard about that sort of thing, and here is the primary, I guess, point to keep in mind when it comes to that concept. Scientifically speaking, there is nothing to suggest that life must exist exclusively at this particular level that you and I call physical. And to clarify that a bit more, two things are physical to each other if they resonate within a similar frequency range. So that's why right now you have radio waves that are passing all around you and through you, and you're not aware of them. They're like ghosts to you. But if you were made of a radio wave, well, those things would be like walls around you. You couldn't pass through them. And so there are many, many, many different ranges of resonance all around us, and we just are aware of a very tiny sliver. And so I think that there are beings that exist all around us in these other frequency ranges, and some of them like to feed upon our energy. You and I are kind of crude in the sense that, well, if we have to get energy, well, we have to put something in our mouths and chew it up and swallow it. But it may be that some of these beings are able to just sort of directly absorb it the way that a plant absorbs nutrients from sunlight. And so some of these things that you might call a soul collector or a demon or whatever are probably these parasitic beings that are able to latch onto us from time to time and absorb our energy. And I think calling it a soul collector is probably a pretty clear way of envisioning this. Maybe not the most accurate way, but it goes to, the point that there are probably many beings on other realms that can latch onto a human. And if you hear that somebody is possessed or something like that, in some cases it might be that they have one of these things that's latched onto them, that's drawing their energy to the extent that they start to become sickly. And when they become sickly, they become depressed. And when they become depressed, they become disoriented. And then they start feeling suicidal. And if nothing is done, then they'll eventually kill themselves or die in some other way. And so this is all part of that same bizarre situation in which we have to consider that there are beings that may feed upon our energy.
Yeah, and I hope someday, I think science, or I would say psychology, is now kind of starting to open up a little bit to that idea, and I hope it does soon, because I think you're exactly right, that those dominoes start to fall, and people can really get in trouble. But Joshua, it was great talking to you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, it is my great pleasure. Thank you for having me. There is so much more to talk about, so I look forward to our future conversations, but you have a wonderful podcast, and thank you again for having me.
And everybody, that is joshuapwarren.com. You're going to check out the Curiosity Shop, and you're going to want to subscribe to, I was listening to your daily podcasts, and you cover everything. It's just fantastic. But yes, I'd love to have you back anytime. Is there anywhere people can see you or anything coming up that you want anybody to get a hold of, or just go to the website and check it all out?
Well, thank you for asking. The best bet is just to go to my website, joshuapwarren.com. Next year, I have a number of things in the works, but at the same time, I really am trying to focus on building my new laboratory here in Las Vegas. And so I'll keep everybody updated through my website, my e-newsletter, and my podcast.
Oh my God. And that you just gave me the perfect opening. I did not know you were in Las Vegas. Hey, I'm there. Everybody who's wondering, the week of February 4th at the Laugh Factory in the Tropicana. And Joshua, you and your wife or any friends are invited to come along. And everybody else, you just remember, I have to do that plug.
Well, thank you, because, my good friend Murray the Magician, he has a big show there at the Tropicana. And he just reached 1 million subscribers on YouTube the other day, and we had a big party there. So you will be in good company there at the Tropicana. So hopefully I'll get to meet you in person then.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joshua.